You know how they say, a man's home is his castle. Well, I thought I'd finally found mine. It had been 10 years since I'd even allowed myself to dream of living somewhere quiet, peaceful, and far away from the chaos of the city. 10 years of grinding at my remote tech job, saving every penny, cutting corners, and living in shoebox apartments so that someday, when the time was right, I could buy a place that felt like it was truly mine. And then I saw an online listing. At 2 a.m., when I couldn't sleep, a small, weathered house with pale blue siding sitting right at the edge of a glassy lake that mirrored the sky. The dock stretched out like a wooden finger into the water, and there was a rowboat tied to it, swaying gently in the breeze. The moment I saw that photo, I knew. I didn't even think about it, just called the realtor the next morning. 3 weeks later, I was standing in the driveway with the keys in my hand. The air smelled cleaner here, fresher. The sound of water lapping against the shore was constant. Like a lullaby I didn't know I needed. My nearest neighbor's house was far enough away that I could barely see their roof. For someone who'd spent years crammed between honking cars and thin apartment walls, this felt like heaven. The first night, I sat out on the dock with a beer and watched the stars. The moonlight danced on the lake, and the only sound was the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface. I thought to myself, this is it. This is what I worked for. The second night was even better. I unpacked more boxes, grilled a steak, and decided I'd take the rowboat out the next day, maybe see if there were any fish worth catching. But on the third day, that's when it started. I was on the dock, untangling some fishing line, when I heard voices sharp, loud, and getting closer. I turned, and that's when I saw them. 5 people marching across my lawn like they owned the place. Leading the pack was a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled, blonde hair and sunglasses so big they looked like they could cover half her face. She was flanked by 2 men in polo shirts and 2 women clutching clipboards like they were weapons. "Are you the new owner?" she demanded, before she was even within polite conversation distance. I stood, a little thrown off by how aggressive. She sounded, "Yeah, that's me. Can I help you?" She took off her sunglasses in this slow, dramatic motion, as if she were about to deliver a courtroom verdict. "I'm Patricia Lane, president of the Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association, and we need to talk about our lake." I blinked. "Your lake?" "Yes," she said flatly, planting a manicured hand on her hip. "This lake belongs to the HOA, which means it belongs to the community. You can't just use it without our permission." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "Ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This lake is on my property." "Have the deed, we'll need to see that," one of the clipboard women cut in, stepping forward like she was about to frisk me for paperwork. I shook my head, still in disbelief. "No, you don't need to see anything. My lawyer already reviewed the documents before I bought the place. The lake is part of my property. It's mine." Patricia's lips curled in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That's not how it works here. The previous owner understood that the lake was for the community's use. He didn't cause problems." "Maybe he didn't," I said evenly, "but I'm not him." For a moment, we just stared at each other, her squinting like she was trying to burn a hole through me with sheer willpower. Finally, she sighed dramatically. "Fine. But if you choose to be difficult, the HOA has ways of persuading uncooperative homeowners." They turned as a group, striding back toward the road. One of the polo shirt guys muttered something under his breath, and the rest chuckled. I stood there on the dock, gripping the fishing rod tighter than I needed to, my pulse quickening. I didn't know much about HOAs. I'd always heard stories, nightmares, really about petty rules, overbearing neighbors, and endless fines. But I figured that was other people's problem. My house was at the edge of the community, practically isolated. I thought they'd leave me alone. I was wrong. The next morning, there was an envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a notice of violation for unauthorized structures, specifically my dock. My dock. The one clearly marked on the property survey I'd received when I bought the place. I shook my head, crumpled the notice, and tossed it in the trash. By the end of the week, I'd get 3 more. Asterisk, asterisk. By Friday, I had 4 violation notices lined up like ugly little trophies on my kitchen counter. One was for unauthorized structures, my dock again. One was for unapproved landscaping, apparently. My natural lakeside grass was a crime against humanity because it didn't match the manicured, fertilizer-fed lawns in the rest of the neighborhood. One was for improperly stored waste bins, even though my trash cans were exactly where the pickup service told me to keep them. And the last one was for disturbing the peace. That one made me laugh out loud because the only sound I'd made all week was the creak of my old floorboards and the occasional clink of a beer bottle. I called the number on the notices, got the HOA office's voicemail, left a short message. This is the new owner of the lake property. Stop sending me fake violations. This is harassment. Next time, my lawyer will be in touch. I thought that might end it. It didn't. The following Monday, I woke to find 2 giant trash cans blocking my driveway. Not mine. These were dented, cracked, and stinking like they hadn't been emptied in months. A petty move, but I got the message. That night, as I sat on my porch, I noticed the faint flicker of flashlights near the dock. I grabbed my phone and hit record. Sure enough, 2 of the HOA goons' polo shirts again were walking along the waterline, measuring something with a tape measure like they were surveying enemy territory. When I called out, they froze, like raccoons caught in headlights, then muttered something about official inspection before hustling off into the dark. That was the moment I realized this wasn't going to stop on its own. They weren't just trying to annoy me, they were building a case, a fake one. A stack of nonsense violations they could use to pressure me into giving up my lake rights. I'd dealt with bullies before, but these bullies had clipboards, legal jargon, and too much free time. So I decided to fight back. The first step was research. I spent hours going over my property deed, the plat maps, and the original sales agreement. Then I pulled up public HOA records and board meeting minutes, which, thankfully, had to be made public by state law. And that's when I found it. Buried in the minutes from 2 years ago was a proposal to acquire the lake as part of the HOA's official property. But the vote had failed, which meant they knew full well the lake wasn't theirs and they were trying to take it anyway. Digging deeper, I found something juicier. A note about increased revenue from lake-related activities. That got my attention. I cross-referenced property reports and found that Patricia's husband George ran a side business, a fishing tour operation. He'd been using the lake for years, renting boats and taking people on exclusive guided trips. But because the HOA didn't own the lake, he'd been doing it without my permission, now without paying a dime. I sat back in my chair and smiled for the first time in days. If they wanted a war, I'd give them one. But first, I needed proof, undeniable, recorded. And time-stamped the next week, I installed 2 discrete trail cameras facing the dock, plus a small microphone hidden under the railing of my porch. I wanted every word, every trespassing step, every sneaky tape measure moment on record, and it didn't take long. 2 nights later, George himself showed up with 3 tourists in tow, loading them into one of the boats tied to my dock. I stayed in the dark, phone in hand, filming every second. I caught him taking cash from them, bragging about his lake, and even bad-mouthing me to the guests by the time he rowed back. I had enough to sink their little operation, but I wasn't going to use it yet. No, I wanted them comfortable, overconfident, certain they were winning. The next morning, I opened my mailbox to find something that made my blood boil: a $1,000 fine for improper lawn maintenance. Apparently, a patch of my yard near the lake was too muddy after last week's rain. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. They had no idea I was already several moves ahead. By now, it was becoming clear. They wanted to break me. Every morning, a new notice. Every evening, a new petty stunt. It was like they had a calendar labeled "Make His Life Miserable," with daily assignments. That $1,000 mud patch fine was laughable, but it told me something important. They were no longer pretending to have a legitimate reason to target me. They were confident enough to invent reasons out of thin air. That's when I decided to push their confidence over the edge. See, people like Patricia and her little army of clipboard soldiers feed on fear. They win when you feel cornered, desperate. But if you make them think you're beaten, they get sloppy. So, I played along. I called the HOA office and left a message in a tone dripping with fake defeat. "Hi. This is the lake property owner. I just want to apologize for the trouble I've caused. I'm still adjusting to the rules here. I'll do better." 2 hours later, Patricia herself was on my porch, smiling like a cat who'd just cornered a mouse. "Well," she said, tilting her head, "I'm glad to hear you're finally understanding how we do things in this community." I nodded like I'd been scolded by a school principal. I didn't realize how serious the HOA takes things here. "Oh, we take them very seriously," she replied, straightening her posture. "This isn't just about you, you know? It's the community's property. The lake needs to be protected for everyone." I kept my voice soft. "Right, of course." She left with a satisfied smirk. And I knew right then that I'd bought myself a golden opportunity. Because when bullies think you've given up, they stop hiding their punches. Over the next week, I caught them on camera half a dozen times, measuring my dock, stepping onto my lawn to inspect plants, even peering into my windows. One of the polo shirt guys left a note saying my American flag was too large and needed to be taken down. I documented it all. Meanwhile, I made friends with a few neighbors, the ones who kept their heads down but had that quiet, weary look of people living under a dictatorship. Over coffee at one of their kitchens, I learned the full story. Patricia had been HOA president for 8 years, winning re-election unopposed every time because anyone who ran against her mysteriously ended up drowning in violation notices. George, her husband, used HOA clout to secure exclusive use of community spaces for his fishing tours, which he ran under the radar. The board members, all hand-picked loyalists. And here's the kicker. Apparently, the HOA collected lake maintenance fees from every resident, despite the fact that the HOA didn't own the lake. Tens of thousands of dollars a year, all under the guise of community upkeep. I was sitting on enough dirt to blow their little empire apart, but I still wasn't ready. No, I wanted them to make one more mistake. One that even their loyal inner circle couldn't ignore. That mistake came on a windy Thursday afternoon. I was inside, editing some photos, when I heard a motorboat start up. I grabbed my camera and stepped outside, and there was George, grinning, giving a group of teenagers a joyride on the lake. Except this time, he wasn't careful. The boat's wake slammed into my dock so hard it cracked one of the planks clean in half. I filmed every second. The splash, the laughter, the crack of the wood. I even got George yelling, "Don't worry, it's not like it belongs to him anyway." It was the smoking gun I'd been waiting for. Asterisk, asterisk. I stood there on the dock, the wind whipping across the lake, watching George speed away like a man who'd just vandalized my property for sport. The broken plank dipped into the water, bobbing like a loose tooth in the gum of my dock. That was it. Game over. I walked back inside, plugged my phone into my laptop, and transferred every clip I'd recorded over the past month. Trespassing, harassment, illegal business activity. Damage to private property. It was like building a case file for a courtroom drama, except I was both the prosecutor and the star witness. Step 1 of the plan was simple: get everything in multiple places. I made 3 copies of the videos and stored them on separate drives. One went into my safe, one went to a neighbor I trusted, and one, well, that one had a special destination. Step 2: hit them where it hurt. I drafted an anonymous email to the state HOA regulatory board. In the subject line, I wrote, "Documented evidence of HOA fraud and harassment, Lakeview Estates." Inside, I attached photos, video files, and a concise summary of what I'd uncovered: the illegal fees, the unapproved fishing business, the vandalism, the trespassing. Then I sent another package, this time physical, to the local news station. I didn't sign my name, but I made sure the envelope was thick enough to get someone curious. I also included a note that read, "Check public tax and deed records. The HOA does not own this lake." Step 3: get my own legal hammer ready. I called my lawyer, a guy named Mark, who I'd known since college. I told him the story from the beginning. Every violation, every fake fine, every clip I'd recorded. By the time I finished, there was a long pause on the line. "Okay," he finally said, "you're sitting on a gold mine. This isn't just civil parts of this could be criminal. Property damage, extortion, fraud. You ready to make some noise?" "I'm beyond ready," I told him. We drafted a formal cease and desist letter addressed to Patricia and the entire HOA board. It cited specific legal statutes, listed every incident of trespassing and harassment, and ended with a little bomb. "If the HOA continues any further contact with me outside of legal counsel, or steps foot on my property again without explicit permission, I will pursue full criminal charges and seek damages in excess of $100,000. Mark sent it certified mail. And then I waited. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. 3 days later, Patricia showed up at my door again. No sunglasses. This time, no smug smile. She was flushed, tight-lipped, and holding the letter in one hand like it was radioactive. "This," she said, waving it, "is unnecessary. You could have come to the board directly." "I did," I said evenly. "Every time you stepped on my property, every violation notice you sent, that was me coming to the board. You ignored me. Now you can talk to my lawyer." Her mouth opened and closed twice, like she was about to argue, but couldn't find the right script. Then she muttered something about not wanting this to get ugly and walked off. That night, I got a text from one of my new neighbor friends. "Turn on Channel 6 now." I did, and there it was. A segment titled "Local HOA Under Investigation for Fraud." My footage was playing on TV. George taking cash at the dock. Patricia storming across my lawn. Even the motorboat cracking the plank. The anchors. Voice was calm, but the words cut deep. The Lakeview Estates HOA has been accused of collecting fees for property it does not legally own, while its president's husband operates a business without permits on private land. It was glorious. The next morning, I woke to a flurry of activity outside. News vans were parked along the roadside, reporters taking notes, cameras pointed at the HOA offices. I could see Patricia pacing inside through her office windows, looking more like a caged animal than a president. By noon, the city zoning office had arrived. Inspectors walked my property, checked my dock, verified the deed, and even confirmed the exact boundaries of the lake. Every claim the HOA had made crumbled under the weight of official documentation. Meanwhile, I kept receiving texts and calls from neighbors. "We can't believe this," one said, "We've been scared for years." Another, "Thank you for standing up. We've wanted someone to fight back for so long." I smiled quietly. I didn't want anyone thinking this was about me being a hero. It was about them finally being exposed for what they were. Then came the icing on the cake. Patricia called an emergency HOA board meeting that evening. The room was tense, and from what my neighbor told me, she was frantically trying to control the narrative. But the members were panicked. Some of them had been quietly taking advantage of the lake fees themselves, and now the cameras, the news exposure, and the legal pressure made it impossible to cover up. By the end of the meeting, 4 board members had resigned, including the 2 clipboard women who had been my constant harassment squad. George, the fishing tour king, had to shut down his operation immediately, surrendering all permits and equipment. The HOA was under investigation for fraud, mismanagement, and harassment. I wasn't done yet. A week later, I installed a new sign at the edge of my property. Private property, no HOA access. Trespassers will be prosecuted. I even added a small camera above the sign, just in case someone thought they could sneak back in. Then I went back to my dock, opened a beer, and looked at the lake. It stretched out, calm and untouched, just as I'd always dreamed. No clipboards, no smug smiles, no harassment. Just peace. Over the next few weeks, the community slowly began to breathe again. Other neighbors started reporting violations they had endured for years, inspired by what had happened. The news followed up on my story, highlighting the illegal practices and the eventual city crackdown. Patricia and George became cautionary tales, not just for HOA boards, but for anyone who thought they could bully their way through other people's lives, and me. I went back to my life, enjoying the lake I had fought for, sharing quiet evenings with friends, and occasionally watching the sunset splash golden light across the water. I never wanted revenge for revenge's sake. I wanted justice, and that lake, my dream, was mine. Finally, as I sat on the dock one evening, the wind in my hair and the water reflecting the sunset like a perfect painting, I thought about the lesson this whole ordeal had taught me. Sometimes, the people who think they have all the power are the easiest to take down if you just wait, watch, and strike at the right moment. And I struck perfectly. Asterisk, asterisk, even after the storm had passed, I stayed vigilant. Old habits die hard, and anyone who had lived under HOA tyranny long enough knows. You never really relax, but for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Freedom. Weeks went by. The city completed its investigation, confirming all my claims. The HOA was fined heavily, and the remaining board members were forced to undergo ethics training and a complete audit of all finances. George's fishing business was permanently shut down, and Patricia quietly moved away, likely hoping no one would notice. But the best part wasn't the fines or the resignations or even the media attention. The best part was watching the subtle shift in the neighborhood. Neighbors I'd only waved to began to talk, smile, even visit. People were no longer afraid of HOA overreach. They were empowered by what had happened. One afternoon, a neighbor knocked on my door, a smile on his face. "Hey, I just wanted to thank you. You didn't just protect your property, you gave all of us back our voice. This place feels like home again." I nodded, a small grin spreading across my face. I didn't do it for fame or recognition. I did it because it was the right thing to do. He laughed softly. "Still, feels pretty satisfying, doesn't it?" I didn't answer. I just poured a beer, walked down to the dock, and looked out across the lake. Calm. Perfect. It struck me then how fragile control is. People like Patricia and George think that intimidation and small abuses of power will last forever. But when someone stands firm, when evidence and patience meet determination, their empire crumbles like sandcastles at high tide. That night, I sat by the fire pit, watching the reflection of the moon on the water, and realized something. I had come here for peace, yes, but I had also learned something invaluable in life. We'll throw bullies and petty tyrants your way, but patience, strategy, and courage can turn the tables completely. The lake shimmered in the moonlight. My dock creaked slightly under my weight, a familiar and comforting sound. Everything was finally as it should be, and as I leaned back in my chair, taking in the silence, I whispered to myself, just loud enough for the water to hear. Some people try to take what isn't theirs. But some of us know how to take back what's rightfully ours and then enjoy it. That lake, that property, that moment, it wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, resilience, and proving that no bully, no matter how confident, could ever take what you've earned with your heart, mind, and hard work. And for once, I could finally let the water, the sunset, and the quiet of my lake house wash away all the stress, all the worry, and all the fear, because I had one. And I was never letting go. So. That's how a simple dream lake house turned into a battlefield with the HOA, and how patience, strategy, and standing up for what's right won the day. The lake is finally mine, the harassment is over, and the neighborhood can breathe again. If you've ever faced unfair rules, bullying, or just wanted to see justice served, remember this. Sometimes the best revenge isn't anger. It's proving them wrong with calm. Clever action. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button, subscribe for more unbelievable HOA tales, and share your own crazy neighborhood experiences in the comments. And remember, your home is your castle, and nobody has the right to take that away.